Okay, so picking back up on chapter 10 and wrapping it up, we need to talk about the idea of offer and acceptance and when we actually have a binding contract. And we've talked about this, but we want to make sure to hammer this point home. Acceptance is the signing by the offeree. Always the offeree. So if I could, just for a second. You got a piece of paper, Jen, in the ball? This is fine. Here's an offer. Okay? So Jen is making an offer to purchase Sandy's property. Everybody with me? So Jen would be the offer or, and Sandy would be the offeree. The offeror has signed when they make the offer. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? So when I transition it over, it's already got one set of signatures on it. Now, if Sandy only has two choices. Simplify this. There are only two options for an offeree. What can she do? She can accept that contract or she can reject it. That's it. We like to muddy it up and say, oh, she can counteroffer, she can do this. All of that is a rejection. You either accept it or you reject it. Does that make sense? If she makes a change, that is first and foremost a rejection of the offer. If she makes one change on that offer, it's the same thing as erasing Jen's signature from it. Are you with me on that? So let's talk about how those roles could switch. Let's say Sandy does put one line through something. She loves everything about this offer, except she doesn't want to close on February 8th. She wants to close on February 10th. So she puts one line through the closing date, and she initials and dates that change. Can she do that? And then she signs the offer. Who is she now? She is the offeror because she has rejected Jen's offer and she has created a new offer of her own. So now Sandy is the offeror and Jen becomes the offeree. At what point do we have acceptance? It's always when the offeree signs the document. I'm sorry?
And is communicated.
Well, that's acceptance. The signing is acceptance. We're under contract when we communicate that acceptance.
Gotcha, okay.
How do we feel about that? So let's talk about this for a second, this communication. As we said, any change or addition is a rejection. Creates a counteroffer. So let's talk about communication of acceptance for a second. First of all, you can communicate in any way. You can communicate orally, over the telephone, in person. You can communicate through the U.S. mail, through FedEx, through email, through text message. Communication of acceptance doesn't necessarily involve transmitting the document. I don't have to provide a signed copy of the document to communicate acceptance. What did we say acceptance was? Acceptance is what? Signing by the offeree. So any form of communicating that the offeree has done what? Signed the document is communication of acceptance. And that's going to create a binding contract. So let's make this slightly more complex. How about that? Everybody with me on this? Okay. Let's say, I'm going to borrow this thing, okay? So we said that Jen is the offeror. She's a buyer. And she's making an offer to purchase Sandy's property. Okay? So Jen fills out the offer. Let's say Jen has representation. She has a buyer's agent. Dee is her buyer's agent. So when Jen fills out the offer, it's probably not going to go directly to the seller. It probably goes through first through the buyer's agent. You with me on that? Let's say Sandy also has a broker. Annie is a listing broker. They work at two separate firms. Okay? So Dee and Annie are working together on the transaction. They are, what do we call that kind of a transaction? They're co-brokering a transaction. So Dee is going to transmit the offer to Annie. All right, so here we've got I've got a buyer interested. Here's an offer. Yada yada yada. Good to go. Now, what's Annie going to do with it?
Give it to
Give it to her client Sandy. Sandy's going to review it. Now let's say Sandy loves it and she wants to accept it. So what is she going to do?
Sign it.
She's going to sign it, and then she's going to give it back where? To her agent. Now, are we under contract?
No.
No. Why not? It hasn't made it back to the other side of the transaction. Now here's what's going to be really important. It's not important that it makes it back to Jen, because Jen and Dee are the same person. It doesn't matter which one it goes to, as long as it goes to somebody on that side of the transaction. So if Annie were to transmit or call Dee and say, hey, we're under contract, would that put us under contract?
Yes.
Absolutely. Right then, that moment, that communication is going to create a binding agreement. Now, give it back for just a second. Let me give you a hypothetical here, see if you follow. Jen's made the offer through her agent Dee. Dee's transmitted it to Annie. Annie sent it to the seller. The seller signs it without making any changes. And the seller returns it to the listing broker, Annie. Are we under contract?
No.
We're not. Dee gets an email from Jen. She's reading the email, and it says, hey Dee, you know, I've thought about this thing, and I've changed my mind. This is not the right house for me. It's not going to work. You know, I want to rescind my offer. Now, can an offer be rescinded? Yes, until it is a what? And is it a contract yet? It is not. So about the time Dee is reading this email, her phone rings. And she looks down and she sees Annie on the caller ID. What should Dee say as soon as she picks up that phone? My client has rescinded their offer. Hey Annie, how are you? Why should she make a point of getting that out there as quickly as possible? Because she knows that Annie could be doing what? Calling to communicate acceptance. And if Annie says we're under contract before Dee says we've rescinded our offer, would we be under contract? Yes, we certainly would. Is everybody with me on that? This moment of communication is ultra important. Ultra important. So it's not that the thing is signed by both parties that matters. It's that it's signed by both parties and then that has been communicated to the other side. Are we good on this?
Yeah.
Here's a question for you. Does our answer change if Dee and Annie work for the same firm? What do we call that?
Designated dual agent.
Don't assume it's designated. Just because it's two separate brokers, it is what?
Dual
It's
agency.
dual agency. You would only go to designated if I said that they were giving what? Advice. Right? All we know is that it's dual. Designated is a form of dual. It could be designated agency, but it's definitely dual agency, right? So does this change the answer if they're dual agents?
No. I don't see
Oh,
why.
it doesn't.
I don't see why.
Annie, what are you holding? A signed and accepted contract, correct?
Same.
And Annie, who do you represent in the transaction? And aren't you a dual agent? Don't you represent the buyer just as much as you do the seller? Has acceptance been communicated to the buyer in this case? Yes, it has, because in this case, the brokers are on both sides of the transaction. So communication with Annie is the same thing as communication with Dee, which is the same thing as communication with Jen.
Okay.
Unless it's designated?
If it were designated, it would be treated like exclusive agency.
Right.
How
Okay.
can you be not designated if you have two agents work for?
Easily. The firm doesn't even have to practice designated agency. Don't ever assume they're talking about designated agency. Ever. They will make it patently clear that they're talking about designated agency. They will either just outright say designated agency, or they will use what word? advice. D is advising her client. D is giving advice. You know, Annie has advised her seller to do this. Clearly then, if they work for the same firm and they are giving advice, that is what? That's designated. But if they just say that Annie and D are broker affiliates of the same firm, where are we?
Dual.
We are at dual agency.
Okay, so that opens me up for that question. So since this is dual agency, then it's a contract.
That's exactly right.
And it's
We
over.
are under contract. That email from Jen to D didn't matter one bit, because who was already holding the accepted contract? Firm was. That's the perfect answer. The firm is already in possession of the accepted contract. And the firm is on both sides. One umbrella with everybody under it.
And everybody in the firm is dual.
And everybody in the firm is dual. They're all working both sides of the transaction. Whether they're physically working it or not, legally, everybody's dual. They're all on both sides.
What are you gonna do?
She's gonna buy the house. No, what she's gonna do,
Actually, you do have
what she's
that.
gonna do is terminate during the
Yeah.
due diligence period. But that late email cost her a due diligence fee. See, that's ultimately what it boils down to. We get into this. These discussions happen all the time now.
Wow.
Because you know you get into a discussion about are we under contract or not. Well, with this contract, the only reason that matters is because of the due diligence fee. Because it's clear that even if we're under contract, the buyer has the right to do what? To walk away. The only question is, 15 minutes ago it was free to walk away, now it costs whatever that amount is of that due diligence fee.
It's the doc sign, if she signs on the doc sign, so is it immediately that I would know?
Immediately you would know. If she signs on what, DocuSign?
Yeah.
Depends on how the system's set up. Most of the time it's not set up that way. Most of the time the signatures go back to whoever initiated the signature package.
Oh.
It really wouldn't matter because your agent already has the document, so.
If it's dual agency.
Yeah.
If it's exclusive agency, it matters a lot.
Yep.
You see how the answer changes with it being dual agency versus exclusive? So even with, and this is what I mean about agency being so important on the exam, because that's a contract question, but you can't answer it without having knowledge about agency relationships. The agency relationship completely changes the answer to the question. We agree with that? Okay? So this idea of communication of acceptance is super important. You're going to get test questions. Now, one of the things I like to do, this is a test-taking strategy of mine that I've used, and my students have, is when you get questions about communication of acceptance, one of the things you can do is just draw like a little T-chart and put the buyer on one side and the seller on the other. You know, so in this case, we would have Jen over here as the buyer and Annie over here as the seller. And as you read through the question, you start to label where people are, on which side of the transaction they are. So we'll give like the initial example we gave. You know, Jen is a buyer who's interested in purchasing Sandy's property. She fills in the standard offer to purchase and contract form 2T from the North Carolina Association of Realtors with the help of her broker D, right? Who's a broker affiliate of Keller Williams, so I would put KW over here. D submits the offer to the listing agent, Annie, of HPW. Annie sends the offer to the seller. Sandy, the seller, signs it, accepts it with no changes. Okay? And so now, let's trace the offer. You ready? The offer went from where first? Jen to D, correct?
Right.
And then from
D to Annie.
D to Annie. This is important. We crossed a boundary, right? We're looking for two of those. One in each direction. That's when we have a contract. That's why this is helpful. Okay? So what did Annie do with it?
Signed it. Send it to Sandy.
She went, I wrote Annie, I meant Sandy, sorry. She sent it to Sandy. What did Sandy do with it?
Sign it.
She signed it and
Give it back to Annie.
she gave it back to Annie. Do we have a contract?
No,
What are we missing?
the communication across the line.
Another line across, right? You know, Annie sends it back to a different broker at Keller Williams.
That's fine.
Do we have a contract?
Yes.
Yes. Because what we want is one line this way and one line that way. Now, how would this scenario have changed if Sandy had made a change to that offer?
You would erase the first arrow.
That first arrow right there
Away.
would have gone away. And so what we would need is coming back this direction. You have a contract when you got an arrow both ways. Everybody good with that? Because each arrow represents a set of signatures, right? And that's when you have a contract. And you can use that tool on tests. Now, if you're doing that T-chart and it says that they're both affiliates of the same firm, to remind yourself of that, you can just do this. Draw an umbrella, right? And just like, okay, they're all under the same, they're all connected. They're all talking because they're all connected.
So good practice would stating that up front with your client to make sure that they understand the communication part of it all.
Mm-hmm.
Making sure that everybody's on the same page, you know.
Absolutely. And so if I was representing the seller there, when Sandy sent me back that signed offer, I would say to her, hold on, let me go touch base with the buyer's agent and get us under contract. I would make it clear that we were not yet under contract. Be careful with the language you use. If you want to really make somebody mad in this business, submit an offer to a listing broker and have them call you back and say, my client has accepted your offer. What does acceptance mean? They have what? They've signed it. And then 2 hours later they call you back and look and say, oh, you know, my client, they changed their mind, they've decided to accept another offer. Can they do that?
Yes.
No, they cannot, because what did they communicate to you the first time? That they accepted, and when they communicated that, you were under what? Contract. Problem is, you used the wrong language, because my client agrees to the terms is different than my client has accepted your offer. What they meant to say, or what they should have said was, my client agrees to the terms, I'm going to send it over to them for signatures right now. So that way, when 2 hours later they decide they want to accept another offer, you can say, well, they told me they were going to accept your offer, but they've changed their mind. Whereas if you say to them, my client's accepted your offer, is the buyer assuming they're under contract?
They are.
They are, because that's what you told them. Don't do that as a broker. That language should be used very carefully. My client has accepted your offer means my client has signed your offer. Because that's the legal definition of acceptance.
I would just email it.
Or email it, yeah. Do it in writing. That's good. Okay? Methods of communication can happen any way. There's no specific way it has to happen unless one of the parties says, you know, we'll only accept communication of acceptance, you know, in person, or, you know, but otherwise any method of communication works. It does not matter. We need to talk about something called the Mailbox Rule. This is a very old piece of law. There was a time when the primary way contracts were formed for real estate was through the Postal Service. You know, and think of like westward expansion in this country. In many cases, the owners of land were, you know, hundreds or thousands of miles away from land they might be selling. Or the purchasers were hundreds or thousands of miles away from. And the land was advertised in newspapers and magazines, and people would fill out a contract and send it in with payment to purchase the land. So how do you decide who actually purchased the land? Who was first? What do you think you use?
The date of contract?
Well, you can't use the date of the contract because you don't know when they dated it. Postmark. You use postmarks. And so here's what the Mailbox Rule says. It says if you are communicating acceptance, which means you're calling or mailing to do what? To say your contract's been signed. If you're communicating acceptance, you're under contract as soon as you put it in the mail, not when it gets there. You're under contract when you put it in possession of the Postal Service. Now, you would think that rule wouldn't be important today because we very rarely use this to form a contract. But is there a type of mail that we use routinely to form a contract? email, guess what? We treat it the same way. Does it matter if the other side has read the email? No. What matters is that you have what? Sent it. We're under contract the moment that email is sent, not when it's read. Is everybody with me on that? Okay. Now, that only applies for communication of acceptance. So the only time you apply the mailbox rule is when you're actually communicating acceptance. Be very careful of that. If somebody's mailing it to their own agent, that's not communication of acceptance. Are you with me? Because you're mailing it to yourself. You're mailing it to your own agent. And in our example here, if Sandy put it in the mail to Annie, that's not communication of acceptance, is it? Because Annie's her broker. It would be communication of acceptance if Annie put it in the mail to either Dee or to Jen. We good with this? So when are we under contract if we mail communication of acceptance? The moment it is sent. And we use postmarks on traditional mail, but the idea is the moment that it's sent. When it's out of your possession. You know it's a felony to go take a piece of mail out of your own mailbox once you put it in there and put that flag up?
Is it really?
It is.
I do that all the time.
It is.
I'm breaking the
That
law.
box says property of the Postmaster General. When you put it in when you put it in your box and put the flag up, the same thing's putting it in there. Reaching in your box and taking it out, same thing reaching in that box and taking it out. Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy.
Yeah, I'm breaking the law.
Why is
Yeah.
it this apply to text messages too? Like,
I'm sorry?
yeah, it would apply to text messages.
It applies to almost every form of communication. Yeah, so even though it's called the mailbox rule, we basically apply it to voicemails. For example, if I leave a voicemail for somebody communicating acceptance, does it matter that they've heard the voicemail? No. If I send a fax, does it matter that they've picked up the fax off the fax machine and read it? Does not. It's that I have communicated it.
It's all time-stamped anyway, so.
That's the idea, that all that stuff is going to be time-stamped, and that's going to create time of contract. Okay? All right? So we've already talked about that. We've already done all these major provisions. Let me skip ahead here. I did that earlier. Did this. All right. So, what offers do we present to sellers?
All.
All of them. Now, here's something important for test taking. What order do you think you present the offers in?
No particular order.
That is the answer. No particular order. Do you think on the test they may put in the order that they arrived as one of the answer choices?
Yes.
They will, and that is not the answer. Why do you think the Real Estate Commission would not want you to just go, oh, well, this is the first offer that came in, and here's the second offer that came in? Why would they not want you to do that?
You could bias your.
It creates favoritism. We're not supposed to provide favor for any offer over another. And just the fact that I said this was the first offer that came in, aren't there some people who are going to place a preference on that just to be fair? You know, oh, well, you know, if they were the first ones in, they should get first shot. Does that make sense?
It does.
One of the things we're dealing with now that's big as far as I'm concerned with providing priority of some offers over other offers is a lot of buyer's agents have started having buyers write these sappy personal letters, I mean, not to make light of it, but my kid has leukemia and we need to move to be close to Duke Hospital, and yeah, what is the purpose of that letter if you're sending it to a seller with your offer?
Create a little bias.
To create favor for your offer, right? What is my job as the real estate broker? To remove favor from the offers, correct? So you know what Travis does not do?
Submit those
He
letters.
does not present the letters to the seller. And I tell him in advance, I say, this is the reason I'm not going to do this. I said, why do you think they send the letter? Yes, they want you to choose their offer, but they ultimately want you to choose their offer when you otherwise might not choose their offer. What I want you to do is to be free to make the best business decision for yourself, and then I'll be glad to share the letters with you. I mean, I have given them to them, and they'll be like, oh, I hope I chose this one. I'm like, nope, not going. But I feel like I have a responsibility to remove that favor from the process.
So you can tell them but not show them the
What?
letters? The letters that other.
Well, I don't tell them till after.
Okay.
I don't tell them till after.
Okay.
Yeah, because I don't want to introduce any favor whatsoever. So if I have 5 offers, I lay out 5 offers. I don't say, that, this is the one from the next door neighbor, or this is the one that came in first, or this is the one we talked about last night. I simply lay them out there. And I go page by page and I explain the relative strengths and weaknesses of each one, so that they can judge without favor. All right? But if you see it on the test, no particular order.
Does that tend to happen a lot these days?
Multiple offers?
No, well, I know multiple offers do, but just like
The
the favoritism, the trying to send in letters. And
Yes.
it seems to
Oh,
be a
it's
trend.
overwhelming. And the other big fear that I have with it is fair housing concerns, because people start talking about all kinds of things that are, like, oh, our church is right across the street, or, there's another family from China who's next door, and we want to be with other people who are from China. I mean, you get all kinds of things, and those are all topics we can't talk about as real estate brokers, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we get very much up on the razor thin edge of committing a fair housing violation by even presenting those letters to our seller, because you're introducing that kind of judgment into the transaction. So I let my sellers know what I'm doing. I tell them in advance. I actually give them the choice. Usually I say, I can give you a bunch of letters that came from these buyers. I said, but let me tell you what they're intended to do. They're intended to make you feel sorry for them and accept less money than you ordinarily would accept. Now, do you want to see them? What do you think the universal answer is at that point in time? Nope. They don't want to be put in that position either. Once you've shown them to them, if they're already there, and they do, and because I've seen people go through this and feel tortured. I saw this happen one time. A seller chose an offer that was $15,000 less than the next highest offer because they felt badly for the buyer who detailed all these houses they had lost in the offer process. I wouldn't be doing my job as a listing broker if I knowingly allowed that to happen, right? If I'm introducing information into this transaction that puts the seller in that position.
I wouldn't want to lighten my pocket either.
Well, yeah, that didn't help on the commission side either, right? I mean, that's true. I just try to keep that sort of bias out. They also present backup offers. So all offers, even the knowledge of potential offers, you make them aware of them. If somebody else has called you and said, we have an offer coming in, you let them know that. Yes, ma'am.
Kind of sticky with the language that says any additional information. So just the fact that you're telling them they exist, the letters exist, that's okay. It seems kind of like you're
Right, because I let them make the choice.
Okay.
I let them make the choice. Do you want to see this? Because it's going to influence your decision. I don't want to exclude it from them and then find out afterwards that I kept something from them. I want them to make the choice. But generally speaking, they don't want that.
But then, if we're on that razor thin line, it could be real easy to fall right over it because
Well,
they want to live next to another Asian person.
Absolutely, and that's why I really prefer. I'm hoping that within the next little while we'll get some clarification from the regulatory bodies about how we handle that, because so many of them do cross the line with protected classes and fair housing. Because they start talking about their kids right away. If you talk about your children, you're in a fair housing violation because that's a protected class.
So that would make me not want to give the letter and then tell them after the fact, I got some letters to show you.
Yeah, right. So, let's see here. Any change to original offer creates a counter offer, but first and foremost, it does what to the original offer? It rejects it. Exactly. Good. We don't need to talk about that. As far as traditionally, these were the traditional copies of the contract that went out to everyone: buyer, seller, lender, closing attorney, listing agent, selling agent. There were 6 copies. When I got into business, we still had to do original copies. And we had to have 6 original signature copies. Now, thankfully, we do not. There's a law called the Electronic Transmissions Act that allows us to send scanned and faxed documents, and they are binding, thank goodness. No more original signature documents. How do we terminate offers? Any offer can be terminated. Oops, sorry, put too many. Any offer can be terminated anytime prior to what? Contract being formed, exactly. Anytime up to the point that we're under contract, we can terminate an offer. If I say my offer is valid till Friday at 5 o'clock, do I have to leave it valid till Friday at 5 o'clock? I can pull it off the table anytime, correct? Sure I can. my offer. So offers can always be withdrawn, always. We could give a time limit and that would expire them, but they can always be withdrawn. Notice here it says the death of either party would terminate an offer. So obviously if the seller you're making the offer to is no longer alive, they can't accept it. So death of either party. Couple of notes here. Earnest money is not required for it to be a binding contract. We mentioned earlier that commission could not be on the sales contract, and that the closing date is not is of the essence. This bullet point down here is really important. Agents cannot disclose the contents of one offer to any other offeror. What that means is that you cannot discuss offers with somebody else who's offering on the property. I can't call Sandy and say, you know, Sandy, we got your offer, but quite honestly, we've got one that's a little bit higher than yours, so if you'd like to rethink yours, let me know. I can't do that because by telling her we have another offer that's higher than hers, haven't I revealed somewhat the contents of another offer? Cannot do that. Can't do that without the permission of whoever made that other offer, and obviously they're not going to give you that permission. So. Okay? Let's talk about installment land contracts. An installment land contract, and this is in your book. Give you a page number here. Take a look at. Offers 314. Page 314, the installment land contract. This is something you're certainly going to see test questions about. So it's also called, you ought to write, make sure a note, you got a note of this, you got it on your slides obviously, a contract for deed. That means the same thing. A contract for deed and an installment land contract are exactly the same thing. They mean exactly the same thing. This is the rent to own of real estate. So, what do I mean by that? Well, talk to me about rent to own in general. What's going on?
When the seller allows the buyer to live there and subsequently pay for the home over a particular amount of time.
Okay? And if they make all the payments, what?
They get the deed.
They get the deed. Notice he said they get the deed if they make all the payments. That is not normally how we purchase property, folks. How many of you have bought a house before? When you did, when did you get the deed?
After. It was
After when?
after the loan was resolved.
Mm.
Like 6
When you get the deed.
When it's recorded,
And when is it recorded?
at the close, or after the.
As soon as you buy it, right?
Yeah,
Even if you got a loan, right?
right.
You get the deed right away. Whose property is it? Day one.
Yours.
The buyer's property. Not in an installment land contract. In an installment land contract, whose property is it?
The sellers.
The seller's. Until how many payments are made? Every single one of them. Do you need to foreclose if somebody falls behind on an installment land contract?
No.
You just tell them to get out.
Yeah, you victim.
You evict them. Because they do not own the property. There is no need for foreclosure. In this case, the deed is not going to be transferred until after every single payment has been made. Now let's talk about what would happen if the buyer were to fall behind. We said they could just be evicted, right? What about all the money they've paid in?
It's forfeit.
Gone. Forfeit. That's dramatically different. Let's talk about just how different that is than the normal method of purchasing. If I buy a house and I make payments on it for 20 years on a 30-year note, and I fall behind on the mortgage, what's my best course of action? I'm sorry? What's my best course of action if I've paid for 20 years on this thing and all of a sudden I fall behind on the mortgage? I don't need to do a short sale, really? You think I've paid on it 20 years and I owe more than it's worth? What's the best course of action? You always say, sell the damn thing. Because if I've paid on it for 20 years, odds are it's worth what? A lot more than I owe on it. And even if I'm behind on the mortgage, selling it, I'm going to still have enough money to satisfy that mortgage and some money to put in my pocket. Is that not the best possible outcome at that point in time? And can I sell it anytime I want to? Even if I have a loan on it? Absolutely. What if it goes up in value? Who gets that money? I do, because it's my property. The installment land contract. Let's say I finance it for 30 years. I make every payment on time for 29 years. I fall behind. Can I sell it?
Yes. No.
How can I sell something that's not mine?
Okay, ask the question again, because I think I missed something.
I have an installment land contract. I financed it for 30 years, right?
Right.
I made every payment on time for 29 years. Fall behind. Can I sell that property?
No.
No, because I don't what? I don't own it. I have no options. None. Let's say it's quadrupled in value during that time. Let's say I agreed to pay $150,000 for it. And I've paid $149,000 for it. And now it's worth $10 million. And I can't find somebody to loan me that $1,000 to make that last payment.
We'll find somebody.
What can the owner do?
And you just say, get out.
Get out. And then turn around and sell it for $10 million. That is an installment land contract. You have made zero progress. You never have equity in the property. Equity is the difference between what it's worth and what you owe. There is never any equity in an installment land contract until you have completely satisfied it, until you completely paid it off. You see why I call it rent to own? Because essentially you're paying what all those years? Rent. And then at the end, finally, you've rented it so long, they're going to do what to you? They're going to deed it over to you. That's why we call it a contract for deed. If you make this many payments, then we will give you the deed. But if you don't, we won't. Why? Why would a buyer do this?
I see it happen online.
They can't get financing any other way. They can't get financing any other way. These are buyers who are desperate. And in most cases, they're sellers who are desperate too. Because would the seller probably rather do a traditional sale? Absolutely, because they want their money what? Now. Now, that being said, does this favor one party over the other significantly?
Installment land, yes.
Yeah, well, who does it favor, buyer or seller? Seller, absolutely. There are properties down at the beach, folks, that have been sold to 15 different people with installment land contracts. And guess who still owns them? The same person who owned it all those sales ago. Because somebody would buy it and they would make payment, and then they would fall into default. And they'd kick them out and they'd start over. The installment land contract. Is everybody okay with this? Understand it?
Buyer pays taxes.
Buyer does pay taxes. Buyer takes on the responsibility for it. Insurance, assessments. They take on all the downsides of ownership and none of the benefits. Again, is that a desperate buyer?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. This is somebody who cannot purchase it in any other way. A lot of tenant farmers bought farms in this way. You know, if you rented a farm, you might have purchased a farm in this manner for a lot of people. Because they couldn't get financing in any other way. It's ultimately what it boiled down to. Now, we talked about the advantages and disadvantages. Buy it for buyers. What's the advantage? Well, if your credit's so bad you can't buy it any other way, the installment land contract is better than just plain old renting. Because plain old renting, you're never going to own the property, right? At least with an installment land contract, you do have a chance to own the property. From the seller's perspective, there might be some income tax benefits. The big one, though, is they still have title. They still have legal title to the property until every single payment is made. This is very different. It gets confused with something called seller financing. People confuse installment land contracts with seller financing. In seller financing, the seller is making a loan to the buyer so that the buyer can do what? Buy the property. So payments are still being made to who? The seller. Here's the big difference. With seller financing, title is transferred up front. Up front. Immediately. As soon as we go to closing, title is transferred. Whereas with an installment land contract, title stays with the seller until it's completely paid off. So in seller financing, if the buyer were to fall into default, what would the seller have to do?
Start foreclosing.
Foreclose, just like any other lien. But in an installment land contract, bye-bye. You got 30 days, get out.
But who wanna do seller financing if it's still pay installment, you don't want money right away?
Of course you want the money right away, so answer your own question. Who would do seller financing?
The desperate seller.
The desperate seller. Oh, isn't it amazing how you can do that when you think about it for a second? Because the natural question you should ask yourself about these sort of exotic things is, well, who the hell would do that? And the answer pretty quickly becomes somebody who can't do it any other way, right? The seller who would entertain seller financing is the seller who can't get the property sold any other way.
Do they get interest?
They do.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
That's
It's good if you don't need the money right now.
Yeah, right.
So that's what you have to weigh out.
And that, like, they cannot raise the price, right? Like you said, if it's only worth 150 now, and then later on it's worth like 500, you cannot really raise the price of the property.
As long as the buyer remains in compliance and pays, you can't raise the price.
Oh, so that's a flip side for it.
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely. Oh, it's obviously better than renting.
Yeah, true.
That's the best way to think of the installment land contract from the buyer's perspective. It is one step better than renting, because it is rent to own. And at least you've picked up that to possibly own part. But it's not a lot better than renting. Are we good with that? You can't do these as far as you need an attorney. You can participate in these. You can even pay commissions, but there's no forms that you can fill out. Excuse me. That was building for like 3 minutes. I'm glad it finally went. You can't fill out any forms for this. You need an attorney to draft these documents. All right? Again, with an installment land contract, the buyer does not have the same rights as a transaction with a mortgage. Because in a transaction with a mortgage, title has already been transferred to the buyer. The buyer owns the property. Whereas in an installment land contract, the seller still owns the property. Okay? Options. We sort of talked about options a little bit on Tuesday when we went through, last Thursday when we did basic contract law, we mentioned options a little bit. Remember we talked about a unilateral contract? Remember? A unilateral contract is a contract where only, what? One person, one party is bound. Only one person has promised to do something. So let me give you a hypothetical example here. Let's say that Oliver is shopping for property. He wants to develop a shopping center. And he's looking for acreage to build a shopping center. And so he goes into this town and he finds 2 sites that he finds could work. Now, he doesn't know which one is going to be the ultimate one he chooses. He just knows that he likes both of them. What's going to be his big concern in liking 2? What do you think? That one could what? One could be sold to somebody else before he can make up his mind about which one to use. Does that make sense? He also might have a concern that if he starts snooping around a lot and trying to figure out which one is going to be best, that the owner of the property may sort of get clued in on that, and what could they do with their pricing? They could raise it. Does that make sense? So, Oliver visits the owner of each one of those pieces of property, and let's say that Lynn owns one and Sandy owns the other, and he sits down with Lynn, he says, I will pay you $5,000 right now if you will agree not to sell your property to anybody but me for the next year. They're going to agree on the price. They're going to agree on everything about that transaction. Has Oliver promised to buy the property? No. Has Lynn promised to sell the property?
Yes.
Yes, he has. He's promised that if Oliver wants to buy, he will do what? Sell it. And he's made an additional promise that he will not sell it to anybody else for that year. Does that make sense? And what did he get in return for those promises? $5,000. So, Oliver's going to have the same conversation with Sandy. She drives a harder bargain. She wants $7,000. But they come to terms on the property, purchase price, and Oliver signs and pays her $7,000 for the same agreement that she will not sell the property to anyone else for the next year. We call those option contracts because Oliver has the what? Option whether or not to move forward. Does the seller have an option here? No. The seller has promised to sell, but the buyer has not promised to buy. That is an option to purchase. Now, during the time period of that option, the seller has no obligation to the buyer other than to do what?
Not sell the property.
To either not sell it to somebody else or to sell it to them, in this case Oliver, when he's ready. Do they have to allow Oliver to access the property?
No.
No. Can Oliver start using the property?
No.
No. The only thing Oliver has is the right to buy it.
Right.
That's it. After the year's up, could they sell the property to somebody else?
Yep.
Yes. And that $5,000, we call that an option fee. What does that word fee mean? Non-refundable. Non-refundable. Everybody understand an option contract here? Feel pretty good? Yes, Oliver.
So actually the option fee goes into the selling price?
Well, that's a good question. Oliver's question is, the selling, or the option fee part of the purchase price. That depends on how the option contract is worded. In most cases, it does, but it depends on the contract that the two draft between each other. Like, for example, I don't know, have we looked at a contract recently that maybe has some amount of money you pay to a seller so that they promise not to sell the property to anybody else for a certain period of time while you get all your shit together and decide if you want to purchase? Have we thought about any kind of a contract like that? The due diligence fee, maybe? What is a due diligence fee? It's an option fee, isn't it? Because at that point in time, the seller's promised not to sell the property to somebody else, but the buyer hasn't promised to do what? They haven't promised to buy, because here's how you know they haven't promised to buy. What does the contract say they can do? Walk away for what reason? Any reason. That doesn't sound much like a contract to me. It's not much of a promise, right? That's an option contract. And in that case, does the option fee or due diligence fee count toward the purchase price? It does, right?
That sounds negotiable too.
It is negotiable.
That's something that, at the time that you put that together, that, that he's talking to Lynn about this option.
Right, and obviously Oliver would want it to be part of the purchase price,
Right.
and Lynn would want it to not be. He'd want it to be on top of. Not for a year. You see how that works, though? That's called an option contract, and it is a unilateral contract. Did you have a question, Jim?
No, just the optionor is the owner of the land.
Yes, they are the one.
It's confusing.
Yes.
It's the opposite from like
Okay.
owner. You would think the person that's.
So option or is the person giving the option to someone, right? So who's receiving the option? That would be Oliver in this case, right? So Oliver would be the optionee, which is the buyer, right? The optionor is the seller. The optionee is the buyer. Yes, they can sometimes get confusing. Yes. All right. Options must be in writing, according to the statute of frauds. Must be recorded. Why do you think an option would have to be recorded? Think about a title search. Think about the next person. Think about somebody who's looking at buying a property. what do we want to make sure Lynn doesn't do?
Sell
Sell it to somebody else, right? So we want to make sure that if Lynn is unscrupulous, not saying that he is, we want to make sure that if Nick comes along and makes Lynn a really nice offer on that property, that he can't sell it. And so the best way to do that is to record this option, because when Nick gets ready to close and he does a title search, what's going to pop up if it's been recorded? That option, and Nick's going to be like, I can't buy this from you. Somebody else has got an option on it.
Is it the option E's responsibility to record it?
So it would be the option E's responsibility to record it, because who does it benefit? The option E. It protects Oliver, right? So it would be his responsibility to record it. He'd be the one that would want to record it because it's going to protect him. Good. Good. And obviously the option contract should always explain all the terms. What's the price going to be? How long is closing going to take? How do I exercise my option? And all of that good stuff. On page 317 in your book, it talks about rights of first refusal, or the right of the first opportunity to purchase. What does it sound like when you say somebody has a right of first refusal?
They get the first option
They get the first shot at purchasing it, right?
Right.
This is not as strong as an option. What power does Oliver have in our option contract? He's got more than the first chance to buy it. What power does he have?
Because in here, he's got the only option.
He's got the only chance to buy it, right? And who ultimately is going to decide if Oliver buys this property? Oliver. Does the seller have any control over that? No, because they gave Oliver the what? The option. A right of first refusal isn't nearly as strong. If Oliver only got a right of first refusal from Lynn, and Lynn got that really nice offer from Nick, then all Lynn's got to do is call Oliver and say, hey, Oliver, somebody's offered me $1 million for my property. So,
What you gonna do?
I'm going to accept it unless you what?
What?
Unless you match it. So the only thing a right of first refusal gives you is the ability to match anybody else's offer. Does that make sense? So you might do this if you were concerned about somebody who was going to sell a property and you don't necessarily want the property. You just want to make sure that you have a chance to buy it if they find another buyer. Not nearly as strong as an option. And that is it for chapter 10. Look at that, with 4 minutes to spare.
Listen, I'm pretty good. Happen, options.
Options happen all the time in commercial real estate. Commercial real estate is full of options. In fact, almost every purchase in commercial real estate begins with an option contract.
So I can go to you and say, here's 5,000, wait for you.
Or I'll give you a hypothetical situation. Let's say Walmart is relocating to a small town. You know, they're coming into town. Is it going to take Walmart a long time to decide what site is going to be the best for them?
No.
Well, I mean, at least a while.
Well, it takes a while.
Because they got to figure out streets and intersections, and does the road need to be widened, and is there proper gas service here? Is there, you know, what intersection is going to be the best one to put this store at? Is that going to take a little bit of determination for them?
Yes.
Is it hard for them to hide who they are in a small town?
Very.
I mean, you know, if you're in a small town and Walmart's in there poking around at certain properties, it ain't going to be long before somebody down at the planning and zoning office is calling Billy Bob, who owns that lot, and going, hey, Billy Bob, Walmart's thinking about buying your land, man. You know, what just happened to the price of Billy Bob's lot?
It just went up.
It went up dramatically. So, before Walmart starts poking around, they will send in Blue Ribbon Properties, LLC, which nobody's ever heard of, to purchase what on several different lots around town? Options. Because once they have the options, haven't they locked in the price?
Yeah.
And so now what can they do? They can have a press release if they want to that says, Walmart's coming to blah, 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 blah. And they can right out in the open figure out which site is going to be best for them, and that poor pitiful soul who agreed to sell it to them for like $50,000 can't do a thing about it because they have what? An option.
Do
So
auctions
that's
always
all.
lock in the purchase price?
Auctions do always lock in the purchase price, whereas rights of first refusal do not lock in the purchase price, but options always do. Alright? So, don't run away. You have homework. And lots of it. First give you answer sheets. So what I would encourage you to do here is not to write any, as much as you can, don't write on the test itself. Not because I care, it's yours to keep. But I think it would be useful for you guys to be able to go back later on and retake the test and do the same questions over again, whereas if you've written on the test, it's hard to do that. So, I'm going to give you bubble sheets, and that way, if you just take one, pass it down. That way, when you come back on Tuesday, we can quickly grade them. Actually, I grade these with my phone. I snap a picture, and it automatically grades them. That's why we use these particular bubble sheets. And there are indeed 121 questions. It's not a fake out. So if you'll answer questions 1 through 100 on the first bubble sheet, and then questions 101 through 121 on the second bubble sheet. And it's meant to be taken open book, which means it should roughly take you about 20 hours to finish it. It's alright, y'all don't have any plans for this weekend anyway. They canceled the playoffs, so you don't have anything to watch.
It was so funny when we were talking about the timestamp on stuff.